you've worked with people
Mm,
who, from these communities, who've taken ayahuasca and had their lives transformed.
mhm.
Can you explain some of those ways?
Well, I've just used my own as an example, and relating this to the African American community. I did an ayahuasca monologue. They're actually called the ayahuasca monologues, and they're on YouTube. And in mine, I shared this experience I had. I was invited to do a ceremony. It was all men, and I was very intrigued by that. And during this ceremony, I'm condensing the story dramatically. At some point, I'm in ceremony, and I become aware that there's a man standing next to me, which is no big deal. But at some point I kind of like, I'm singing the songs, and the ayahuasca thing is very beautiful, and having this experience of like, oh, my brotherhood, I'm here with all the
Mhm.
guys. And then I start realizing like, wait, everybody that is participating in this ceremony is accounted for. Like, who's this person standing next to me? And I look over, and lo and behold, it's my father who had died 5 years earlier. Right?
Wow.
Yeah. And as vividly standing next to me as I'm, you sitting in front of me. And talk about, I'm tripping, that's what I'm thinking. But so this vision, I'll call it, of my father says to me, oh, I'm glad I have your attention. Let's go take a walk. So, of course, in the ceremony, you're not allowed to leave. So I asked permission from the leader. I said, hey, my father's here. Where else are you going to say to somebody, my dad's here, he passed away? And they go, oh, cool.
Only in an ayahuasca ceremony would they
Exactly, right?
understand that. It is a common
It is very
theme that
common.
people are visited by loved
Exactly.
ones
Yeah.
who've passed away.
Yeah. And so, long story short, he says, yes, as long as you stay within visual range, we need to see you. So I go journeying with my father. And in that experience, basically, through this conversation, what happens in the condensed version is that my father, his father, and my mother's father all appear to me. And they basically say, we brought you here because we want to apologize for the abuse that you suffered growing up. And my family, it's a very interesting and dicey topic to always get into with the African American culture, is the form of discipline, which is like spanking or beating or whipping, whatever they call it, is really commonplace. And so much so that growing up, that was normal. And I assumed, like, well, this is just the way kids are raised. And as I kind of grew up and started meeting other kids in school, I was actually shocked to find out that I was meeting like really good friends who were awesome, who told me, like, what, you're kidding? My father's never hit me. I'm like, no. Like, how did you turn out okay? you know? So I'm like reflecting on that, thinking, God, that's really strange. So in this experience, suddenly, as they're saying this, I am transported back. It was like that near-death experience that people talk about at the end of life, where I'm suddenly replaying my life. And I'm watching all of these experiences of me being, doing simple things like dropping a glass and breaking it. And then my father or grandfather's response would be to come with a belt, and beep, 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 beep. And it just seemed like, well, that's what you do. So as I'm watching all of that, I'm realizing what an effect that had on me and how that actually wasn't okay for a little very sensitive, 5 or 6 year old. And that vision turned into me seeing them being beaten by their fathers and their fathers and their fathers. All the way back, this vision goes to me watching slaves in Africa running through grasses being chased by either their own people or Europeans coming to bring slaves to America. And then it clicked. I'm like, oh my gosh. And all these like ancestors, my father and their fathers, in that moment they're saying, yes, like this is something we inherited it. We don't know any other way. And we apologize because we realize, the reason it was passed down to you is because it was passed down to us. And this trauma within our community goes all the way back to slavery. There's no way around it. And in that moment, it was such a huge release of pent up both anger, frustration, all the pain and suffering that was caused from that. And as you mentioned, earlier, there is this sense of liberation. And it may seem simple, but in reality, what happened in that moment was I realized I feel like I'm standing in my own skin and my own body and consciousness for the first time in my life. I was like liberated, right?
Wow.
So much so that it felt like, I don't even know who this person is without that story, running in the background. So it was a tremendous help to me, and other things happen related to that are in this monologue. But that was the basis of it. So what I started seeing was like, wow, the African American community, particularly, is so anti-drug, and appropriately so because of how it's destroyed the community. But they're literally talking about drugs that were, as we know, kind of introduced into that community by now. There's research, that proves it was by the CIA at some point. So they have this really interesting relationship with drugs because so many African American men are in prison from drug-related causes, either selling it or using it. So there's this whole stigma now that I feel like something like ayahuasca, which could be incredibly beneficial for my community, has such a stigma on it, that they wouldn't even go near it. But I feel like, I'll be the poster child, and a lot of other amazing African American people I know that now use ayahuasca are reporting the same thing, like, wow, this could so liberate and benefit our community and our culture. Yeah.
Because I feel too, out of any culture in the US, I mean, just with the history of slavery and just
Mm.
constant oppression, there has to be so much trauma
There has
just
to be.
built into the DNA.
Yeah. Yeah, there has to be. And from the inside out, actually being raised in that community and being an African American, you know, um, it's difficult to bring up these subjects. Like, I believe her name is Dr. Joyce O'Leary. She started touring around doing this lecture series that was basically called post-traumatic slave syndrome. That was really rejected early on, not only by established, I know the psychiatric community, because to call it a syndrome, it has to be approved as one, but also within the African American community, because what she was basically saying was the reason we are the way we are is because we're all descendants of slaves. And we are the result of a culture that was extremely traumatized. And she goes on in this lecture to explain all the reasons why. And I was gripped by that because I knew what she was saying was basically true. Maybe not all the details of it, but the overall essence of it was true because I lived it in my own experience. Yeah, so for me, because I know that is true, and I know that as a culture, as most cultures or people of color in the United States, to some degree, you are the descendants of a group of people that were traumatized. And not that Europeans weren't. That's why they came here, right? They're also escaping their own trauma and oppression. But my life took off because of that experience that I did in the all-male ayahuasca ceremony. I really felt like, wow, I am now liberated to kind of like move on this planet in an authentic way and accomplish what I want to do, have the kind of authentic relationships with people that I want to have, and a depth of love that I know is possible, that was all being shrouded and controlled by this trauma that was always hiding in the background.